Hello, person watching this video. My name is Neko, and today I'd like to take you back to the past. Welcome to my Let's Remember Pokémon series. So far, we've covered the introduction of the red and blue versions in the West, as well as the beginning of the Pokémon anime on Western television. For today's episode, I'm going to take a look back at another memory I have with the franchise. Pokémon the first movie. Let's dive right back into nostalgia land and take a trip to 1999. 1999 had been a fantastic year for me. Over the course of that year, I had begun my first Pokémon playthrough in the Game Boy game, as well as occasionally getting opportunities to catch episodes of the show on TV. By the time summer vacation ended, I had purchased my first Pokémon cards, played Pokémon Snap, and got my first Pokémon plushies. The Pokémon phenomenon was at an all-time high, even getting a French translation on Télétoon, and even later at TQS in Canada. All of these subjects are worthy of their own episode, but today we'll focus on one specific thing: the first movie. Around that time, I would occasionally get access to this brand new and mysterious thing called the Internet. We didn't get internet at home until December 2001, so before that, every time I wanted to consult the web, I needed to do it from school, my uncle's place, or at a friend's house. The very first time I ever saw anything related to the first movie was at my friend John Eric's place. One late evening, I remember us hanging out outside with his big brother and his friends. The older kids were playing pranks on people in the neighborhood, ringing their doorbells and running away. John Eric and I were tagging along and getting pretty uncomfortable with this situation, until a police car began patrolling the neighborhood. His big brother and his friends scattered in a panic, and I remember John Eric telling me to follow him. We ran to one of his friend's backyard and climbed up to a tree house, and we stayed hidden for what seemed like an eternity. I think this was my first real adrenaline rush. After things quieted down, we went back to his house using the basement door to come in unnoticed. His mom was still up, and she reprimanded us for making her worry, saying that his big brother was in trouble. I felt ashamed, and we headed upstairs to go on the computer. He wanted to show me about a mysterious new Pokémon called Peekaboo. That was when we saw it. On the internet, we visited a website where information regarding the Japanese broadcast of the show was made available in English. On the page, one specific picture caught our attention. It was a picture of the short movie Pikachu's Vacation, featuring two brand new Pokémon. I was shocked. Seeing new Pokémon was such an exciting thing back then. Every time a new Pokémon outside the original 151 was revealed, I was overwhelmed with curiosity. This little piece of information was the only hint I got of that movie for a long time. I kept using the internet at school from this point to look up information on this mysterious Peekaboo, but the next bit of info I would get about the movie came in a different format. By that time, my parents were more than aware of my passion for Pokémon. Because of that, every time they would find something related to it, they'd let me know. One evening, my mother gave me a magazine she had bought at the Montreal Central Station. It was a volume of the Beckett Collector's Magazine with a very special article. In this issue, they had a section dedicated to the upcoming Pokémon the first movie. This was right around the time when we got our cable box, so not only did I get to see the commercials for the movie on TV, but now I could also read up about it in magazines. Nintendo Power soon followed with their own articles on the upcoming film. I remember how exciting it was to see these images and read up about what this new motion picture would be. I couldn't believe I would get to see Pokémon on the big screen. In Canada, the movie was set to premiere November 12th. They even announced that moviegoers would receive one limited promotional Pokémon card each. The cards were Mewtwo, Pikachu, Dragonite, and Electabuzz. November 12th was right around the corner and I was hyped. When that special Friday finally came, my parents gave me a ride to my friend Simon's place. He lived in a small city called Dorian, where they had a movie theater showing the film, and his mother was going to give us a ride to the cinema later that evening. It was a dark, cloudy afternoon, and I clearly remember Simon and I hanging out outside his house, behind his father's store. I had brought an issue of Nintendo Power with a sneak peek information about what would eventually become Paper Mario, and we were discussing that, as well as getting hyped for the Pokémon movie. I remember noticing something odd about Simon, though. In my school, people were just now getting introduced to the Pokémon phenomenon thanks to its French broadcast on TQS and the popularity of the Pokémon cards, as well as the recent release of Pokémon Yellow. Since Simon lived in the city, his school had been familiar with Pokémon for much longer, and it seemed that his friends were growing out of it. He told me that most of his friends had moved on to other things, and that they even began to say that Pokémon was childish. Basically, the initial boom of interest for Pokémon had died out at his school, and he was feeling the effect of that. On the other hand, my love for the franchise was in full bloom, and I was feeling a bit worried seeing my friend like that. His mother drove us to the movie theater and dropped us off there. This was my first time going to see a film without anyone's parents around, and that only contributed to the excitement of seeing the movie. The crowd was huge, and excitement filled the air. People were wearing Pokémon shirts or caps, some had brought merchandise like plushies, others were trading or battling on their Game Boy. We had to wait in line to purchase our tickets, and when they handed out the tickets they gave us each an Electabuzz promotional card. We got in line to enter the projection room and waited with everyone. I couldn't contain my happiness at that moment. I was surrounded by fellow Pokémon fans and I was about to see the first movie. Simon was always a lot calmer and collected than me, but that day he seemed unusually quiet. It was like he was getting ready to judge whether he wanted to remain a Pokémon fan or drop out like his friends. Holding that Electabuzz card in my hand, I anxiously awaited the opening of the projection room doors. When they finally let everyone in, we walked into the huge room and found good seats. The movie was about to start and people were talking about Pokémon all around us. The room was full, mostly with kids and very few parents. The whole thing seemed surreal. The lights slowly went out and everyone got quiet. It was time. The movie was starting. When the movie opened with the Pikachu's Vacation special, I was taken by surprise. For some reason, I had completely forgotten that this segment was part of the movie. I remember people laughing and the overall mood of joy and lightheartedness that filled the room. That colorful special was gorgeous looking, and seeing Pikachu and his pals on the big screen felt magical. I was hypnotized by the gorgeous art, the colors, and the wonderful score. Even more exciting was finally seeing Maril and Snubbull on the big screen. That little special went by so fast, but I remember the excitement I felt seeing Squirtle racing Maril, or the laughter when Pikachu and Raichu were destroying everything in their path as they were running side by side. The Pokémon all got together to watch the sunset, and I felt at peace. Moments like these made me feel so happy to be part of that phenomenon, and I watched the sunset with them. They got reunited with their trainers, and the special ended. Simon was quiet, and I had no idea if he had enjoyed this little special like I did. When we first got our Pokémon plushies, Simon and I would come up with stories for them, where Poliwhirl, Jigglypuff, Eevee, and the Pikachu brothers went on all kinds of adventures. This special reminded me of that, and I wondered if he felt the same. Before I could go any deeper into these thoughts, the main feature began. That opening bit of narration by Mewtwo at the bottom of the lake felt so mysterious and ominous. Already I was entranced by the soundtrack, and I was getting shivers. The movie had begun with such a somber tone, seeing Mewtwo from the moment of his creation, destroying the laboratory and meeting Giovanni. I remember feeling uneasy, discovering Mewtwo's origin. I went to this movie without any expectations, and the opening was making me realize that I was dealing with something serious. When Mewtwo escaped Giovanni's hideout, I was reminded of a scene I had seen in the cartoon just a few weeks back. So that's what it was, I remember thinking. The title appeared with that ominous Mewtwo theme in the background. I got shivers. I was in for quite a ride. I can't even describe the joy and excitement I felt during the opening scene when the Pokémon theme began to play in a fully remixed version. Ash was battling a trainer who had sent out a brand new Pokémon, Donphan. This musical opening segment was such a treat. I still get shivers to this day listening to that version of the opening song. The gorgeous animation, the colors, the overall fun, it's nostalgic bliss. A nice touch was seeing Team Rocket spying on the whole thing. After seeing Dragonite take off from Mewtwo's island in a gorgeous sequence, we see Ash receive his invitation to the island from an ominous hologram. The music turning mysterious for that moment was a great touch, and it really drove the point home that the movie would take a more sinister tone. Curious to see what this invitation was, Team Rocket intercepted the Dragonite messenger to see where the twerps were going. Then came the storm. All the trainers who wanted to make their way to the island by boat were stuck at a Pokémon Center because of a violent storm. Not only that, but we found out that this Pokémon Center's Nurse Joy had gone missing. At this moment, a mysterious woman called Miranda told the trainers about a storm that threatened to wipe out all Pokémon and humans alike long ago. In her legend, the tears of the surviving Pokémon had brought their fallen companions back to life. Determined to make their way to the island, the bravest trainers decided to find a way to make it there on their own. Ignoring Miranda's warnings, a selection of trainers headed out in the storm, some using their water Pokémon to cross the sea, while others went by air using their flying Pokémon. Ash and his friends felt the storm was a bit too much for their Pokémon, until Team Rocket, disguised as Vikings, showed up to help them across the sea. It was time to make it to the island. People in the cinema were laughing, and the whole movie was filling me with excitement. I remember so many memorable scenes. Ash and his friends braving the storm to make it to the island. Being introduced to the few trainers who had managed to make it across the storm, and everyone showing off their Pokémon in the dining room while waiting for their mysterious host. Team Rocket sneaking on the island, being followed by Mew without realizing it. Mewtwo's servant revealing herself to be a brainwashed Nurse Joy. But most of all, Mewtwo's introduction. What an intimidating and cold character. I never expected to see such a sinister character in Pokémon. His somber tone and view of the world was giving me shivers, and I remember how powerful and terrifying he was. No one could stand in his way, and he was planning to wipe out humanity and Pokémon alike, leaving the world only for him and his cloned Pokémon brethren. The movie was much darker than I anticipated, but it still felt like a Pokémon story. Seeing these familiar characters having to survive this scenario was fascinating, and I was completely absorbed in the story. The movie didn't lack any fan service either. So many Pokémon were featured, both on Mewtwo's side and on the Pokémon trainer's side. Seeing the clone version of Charizard and the original getting into a battle was both exciting and scary. Mew finally arrived to confront Mewtwo, and a big battle began. The cloned Pokémon were fighting the original, and Ash was horrified by this violence. Pikachu refusing to fight his clone, and his clone slapping him until he was too tired to do so. How can anyone forget that image? The Pokémon were exhausted after battling and were falling one after the other. That vision was too much for Ash, and at that moment, he decided to stop the fighting. Trying to stop Mew and Mewtwo, Ash tried to get between the two. The whole audience got quiet. Our hero had turned to stone. Mew and Mewtwo were shocked. Then that infamous scene happened. The Pokémon's tears brought Ash back to life. I always saw myself as an easy audience. I usually get carried into a movie by my emotions first, rather than by my logic. This movie was no exception. In fact, it was the perfect example of style over substance. The movie's visuals and score carried me through an incredible journey. And at that moment, I was crying. Crying with the Pokémon. The score was beautiful, and the imagery accompanied it perfectly. My heart was heavy, and my eyes were burning. Ash returned to life and hugged Pikachu. I was overwhelmed with emotion. The big finale theme was playing in the background as Mewtwo and Mew decided to stop fighting. Taking his cloned Pokémon with him, Mewtwo left, deciding to give the world a chance. Maybe he could fit in. Maybe the world had a place for his kind. The movie ended, and the beautiful ending credits began to play. I remember seeing Ash, Pikachu, Misty, and Brock walking through these gorgeous pieces of scenery. Each of these ending images would make fantastic wallpapers or posters, and to me, they represent the beauty and the magic of the world of Pokémon perfectly. My heart was light, and my eyes were still wet from crying. Simon and I headed outside to wait for his mother to come pick us up. It was a cold November night, but my chest felt warm. Simon was very quiet, and I remember being quiet too. I couldn't wait to see the movie again, and I was hoping to be able to watch it with all my friends. We got into his mother's car and began the drive back home. Simon finally broke the silence. "Nick, I don't think I like Pokémon anymore." My heart sunk. This was the last time I ever shared my passion for Pokémon with Simon. He had been the first of my friends to get into it with me, and now he was also the first to move on. He told me later that night that he understood if I still loved it, and that he would never make fun of me for it. He knew that Chanel, Timothy, Jeffrey, and I were way into it and respected that. I decided to respect his choice as well. That night, we didn't speak of the movie. It would take a while until I could see the movie again, but I waited anxiously for that moment. When the movie came out on VHS in March 2000, I remember my friend Guillaume lending it to me on a sunny Friday afternoon, and going to get my friend Pierre to watch it together. I had newly introduced him to Pokémon, and he was getting into it too. He was the first person I watched the tape with, and I remember us loving every minute of it. The tape came with a Mewtwo promotional card, which I ended up trading later on. I still hold this movie close to my heart to this day, and I still find it a joy to watch. Those were my memories of this very special film. How did you first hear about Pokémon the first movie? Do you remember waiting anxiously for the movie too? When did you first see it, and how did you feel? What memories do you keep of this movie? For our next episode, we're going to take a look back at a very nostalgic game for me. Pokémon Yellow version.